Changing a signal's amplitude is one of the most fundamental ways of processing a signal. Sometimes this is also called changing the level or the gain. In this section, we're going to look at and program several of the common ways that audio engineers think about working with a signal's amplitude. First, let me open up a digital audio workstation and look at many of the places where we use this type of processing. Here are some examples of several ways an audio engineer could change a signal's amplitude while working in a digital audio workstation. I'll be using Pro Tools, but these types of controls show up in almost any DAW. As an example, I've loaded in a sound file of an acoustic guitar part. It sounds like this. One obvious place to find a control that can change the signal's amplitude is in the mix window, specifically here at the channel fader, where this fader turns the amplitude up or down. This same type of processing also shows up in plugins. Here's one example called a trim plugin, where the primary purpose is to apply that same kind of amplitude processing. This processing also shows up in more complicated kinds of effects. Here's an example of an equalizer plugin, but we still have the amplitude control for the input and output level. Besides using plugins, there's also the ability to use something called clip gain, where we're changing the amplitude by drawing it in on the actual audio file. You can right-click on the file, show the clip gain line, and here draw in, which I want to increase it or decrease it. Another way to process the entire audio file is to use something called an audio sweep processor. Several examples of this is one called the gain processor. What this will do is actually create a new audio file on the computer. So we can decrease the amplitude and render it. Or also increase it. Another slightly more complicated processor that's still used to change a signal's amplitude is called the normalize processor. This one changes the amplitude based on a specific criterion provided by the user. So we're going to normalize the amplitude so that the peak reaches some level, like 0 dB full scale. This is something we'll be exploring in this section. We can also normalize the peak to something other than 0 dB. Another way to change the signal's amplitude is to analyze the RMS level. This is the energy across the whole signal rather than just the peak. We can still normalize it so the RMS value meets some criterion. So those are several different examples of how an audio engineer could change a signal's amplitude while working in Pro Tools. In this section, what we're going to do is recreate this type of processing by writing some code in MATLAB.